I want you to pay very close attention to what you notice today, because August 27th carries an astrological pattern that can bring something hidden into sharp focus. And the deeper I have looked into this event, the more significant the timing becomes. Today, the Sun and Mercury meet at the exact same degree in Virgo, creating what astrology calls a Cazimi. The term comes from Arabic and refers to being in the heart, describing Mercury as though it has entered the very center of the Sun. At first glance, you might hear that and think it is simply another planetary meeting, another date on an already crowded astrological calendar, but this particular alignment deserves much more attention. If your mind has felt unusually scattered recently, if you have been struggling to hold on to one clear thought, or if your gut has been behaving strangely without an obvious explanation, do not dismiss those experiences too quickly. There is a specific connection between what is happening in the sky and the themes surrounding this alignment, and we will come back to that later. Before we reach the three distinct messages associated with this event, you need to understand the larger environment in which this Cazimi is taking place, because the timing is essential. This alignment is not appearing by itself. It is unfolding during an especially intense astrological period, while we are positioned between two eclipses. On August 12th, a total solar eclipse occurred in Leo, and tonight, only hours after the Cazimi reaches its moment, a partial lunar eclipse in Pisces is arriving. That places this Mercury and Sun meeting directly inside an unusually charged stretch of the year. It can feel as though your normal sense of stability has become harder to locate. You may look at circumstances that once seemed familiar and suddenly wonder why they no longer feel the same. Memories can return without warning. Familiar emotional patterns can repeat themselves, and situations that once seemed straightforward can suddenly feel both urgent and impossible to define. If you have been experiencing that strange combination of pressure and uncertainty, this is the larger context to keep in mind. Eclipse periods are often associated in astrology with moments when things that have remained outside conscious awareness become harder to ignore. The total solar eclipse in Leo began opening questions around identity, recognition, personal expression, and the stories you have created about who you are and how you are meant to be seen. Now the approaching lunar eclipse in Pisces turns attention toward emotional accumulation and the weight you may have been carrying internally, whether that weight has existed for months or has followed you for years. Between these two eclipse points sits the Cazimi, almost like a moment of concentration inside a much larger period of change. Imagine moving through a room where everything has been rearranged, while you are still trying to understand what belongs where, and then suddenly a light switches on long enough for you to recognize what you are actually looking at. That is the role this alignment represents. Before the emotional release associated with the Pisces lunar eclipse becomes the dominant theme, Mercury receives a moment of extraordinary emphasis, giving the mind a symbolic opportunity to distinguish what deserves your attention from what no longer belongs in your life. This is why the clarity associated with this Cazimi matters so much. It is not simply about receiving more information. It is about recognizing information you may already have sensed, but were previously unable or unwilling to interpret clearly. The strange thing about real clarity is that it often does not feel dramatic when it arrives. Sometimes, it is simply the quiet realization that you already know the answer. A situation that seemed impossible to understand can suddenly reveal its pattern. A decision that required endless analysis can become surprisingly simple. A thought you kept pushing away can finally make sense when you see it from the right angle. That is the kind of inner shift this moment is inviting you to observe. And there is another reason this Cazimi deserves special attention. Mercury moves through all 12 signs of the zodiac and meets the Sun approximately every 4 months, which means a Sun and Mercury conjunction is not exceptionally rare by itself. The important distinction is the sign in which the meeting occurs. Today, that sign is Virgo, and Virgo is uniquely powerful territory for Mercury in traditional astrology. Traditional astrology uses a system of planetary strength that considers how naturally a planet can express itself in a particular sign. When a planet occupies the sign it rules, it is considered to be in domicile, almost like returning to its own home where it has authority and familiarity. Exaltation represents another form of heightened strength, a condition in which the planet is considered elevated and capable of expressing its qualities at an especially high level. Most traditional planets have their domicile in one sign and their exaltation in another. Mercury is the exception. Mercury has both its domicile and its exaltation in Virgo. That makes Virgo an exceptionally strong environment for Mercury, because the planet associated with thought, communication, perception, interpretation, and mental processing is placed in the sign where traditional astrology considers its powers to be most concentrated. Now place that Mercury directly in the heart of the Sun, and the symbolism becomes even more focused. The mind is not merely moving through Virgo. Mercury is meeting the Sun at the exact same degree while occupying the sign connected to its strongest traditional condition. This is why the potential sense of mental precision surrounding the event is so important. You may have already noticed small signs of this shift during the past few days. Perhaps something that confused you recently has started arranging itself into a recognizable pattern. Perhaps you've stopped needing as much reassurance about a choice you were struggling to make. Maybe an old conversation suddenly makes more sense, or you are beginning to understand why a certain situation affected you so deeply. These moments can seem ordinary from the outside, but internally they can represent the difference between guessing and knowing. Think about the experience of sitting in a dim room for so long that your eyes have adjusted to the darkness. At first, you can barely distinguish anything. Then the light begins increasing gradually, and objects that were always there suddenly become visible. Nothing necessarily changed about the room. Your ability to perceive it changed. That is the deeper psychological meaning to watch for here. The Cazimi does not need to create an entirely new reality for you. It can instead illuminate information that was already present beneath confusion, hesitation, emotional noise, or mental exhaustion. This is why the realizations that emerge around August 27th may deserve more attention than your usual passing thoughts. The value is not necessarily in how dramatic the insight feels, but in how precisely it explains something that has been difficult to understand. You may find yourself recognizing a pattern rather than inventing a new story, understanding a decision rather than forcing one, or finally seeing the difference between what you genuinely know and what fear has been telling you. And as this moment reaches its exact peak, the question becomes much more personal. What becomes visible to you when the mental noise finally becomes quiet? And what will that clarity reveal about the next step you are being asked to recognize? That is where the deeper messages of this alignment begin to unfold. There is a reason this moment may feel as though something larger than you is drawing your attention toward one very specific point, because the pattern forming in the sky gives this day a significance that goes far beyond the Cazimi by itself. Pluto is positioned in early Aquarius, while Neptune is positioned in early Aries, and both of these planets carry an extraordinary kind of long-term influence because they move through the zodiac over decades rather than months. At this moment, they are connected through a sextile, a harmonious 60-degree relationship that allows their energies to cooperate rather than collide. Picture 2. Enormous currents moving beneath the surface of the ocean, powerful enough to reshape the landscape over time, yet quiet enough that you might not immediately notice what they are doing. That is the nature of this Pluto and Neptune connection. It contains tremendous possibility, but possibility alone does not automatically become reality. A sextile represents energy that is available, waiting for something to engage it and give it direction. That activating force arrives today through the Sun and Mercury in Virgo. which form exact tense angles with both Pluto and Neptune at the same time. When these planetary relationships converge in this particular way, they create a rare configuration known as a yod, often referred to as the finger of God. The name may sound intense, but the symbolism becomes easier to understand when you imagine an enormous amount of collective energy being narrowed toward one precise point, almost like a wide beam suddenly being concentrated into a single focused ray of light. That focal point is the Cazimi occurring today. This is why the moment deserves your attention. Pluto in Aquarius represents enormous transformations involving technology, power structures, and the fundamental ways society is being reorganized. Neptune in Aries brings another enormous current, one connected with new spiritual vision, fresh idealism, and the growing sense that another kind of world can exist. These themes are so large that they can easily become abstract. You can feel inspired by them, think about them, dream about them, and still have no idea what to physically do next. The yod changes the question. Instead of leaving those enormous forces floating somewhere beyond your reach, it directs them toward Virgo, a sign associated with practical application, daily systems, careful organization, and solving problems one step at a time. Suddenly, the message becomes much more personal and much more demanding. The transformation you keep imagining cannot remain an idea forever. At some point, the vision has to enter your schedule, your habits, your choices, and your ordinary actions. This is where the energy becomes real. You may have spent months thinking about what you want to change, imagining a different career, picturing a healthier routine, considering a creative project, or sensing that your life is supposed to move in another direction. Yet there is a profound difference between recognizing a possibility and constructing it. Virgo asks you to cross that distance. It asks what you can actually do today, what you can repeat tomorrow, and what simple structure can keep that movement alive after the emotional intensity of this moment passes. The deeper lesson is that transformation does not always arrive through one spectacular decision. Sometimes it is built through the ordinary actions you are willing to perform consistently when nobody else is watching. The breakthrough may not look dramatic from the outside. It may be an email you finally send, a task you finally begin, a boundary you finally establish, a routine you finally commit to, or one practical decision that turns an overwhelming vision into something measurable. This is why the message of the yod can feel both beautiful and uncomfortable. It does not allow you to remain safely inside imagination forever. It brings the larger dream down into the details of real life. The revolution, in this sense, lives inside the routine. And if you understand that, eclipse season can become less about being swept away by circumstances and more about consciously participating in the transformation already unfolding around you. This brings us directly to the first message, and for many people, this may be the part that feels the most immediate. The mental haze begins to break. Not merely a small improvement in concentration, not simply a productive afternoon, but a much sharper experience of recognizing what has been hidden beneath uncertainty. Questions you have repeatedly revisited, decisions you have postponed, and situations where you have continued telling yourself that you do not know what to do may suddenly look completely different. The surprising part is that the answer may not feel as though it has just been created. It may feel as though it was already there, and you have finally become capable of seeing it. This distinction matters. Mercury in Virgo, at this exceptional level of traditional dignity, is not simply associated with generating more thoughts. It is associated with discernment, with separating what matters from what distracts you, identifying the actual source of a problem, and recognizing what genuinely needs to change. There is very little room here for comforting yourself with a story simply because that story is easier to accept. This kind of clarity can be extremely honest. It may show you what is functioning, but it can also reveal what has quietly stopped working. You may suddenly recognize the self-deception you have been using to delay a difficult decision. You may see how a particular narrative has allowed you to remain in a situation that you already knew was not right. A relationship, a project, or a habit that you have continued tolerating may appear with a level of honesty that makes it impossible to keep pretending you do not see the problem. That realization does not mean you need to attack yourself or judge every previous choice you made. There is an important difference between self-punishment and self-honesty. The purpose of this clarity is not to make you feel inadequate. It is to remove the confusion that has prevented you from responding truthfully. Sometimes the hardest thing is not knowing what the answer is. Sometimes the hardest thing is admitting that you already know. If a realization arrives for you today, give it somewhere to live. Write it down. Pay attention to the calm certainty behind it, rather than immediately allowing fear to argue against it. You may hear an inner voice becoming remarkably simple, telling you what needs to happen without the usual flood of competing explanations. That quiet recognition may be more meaningful than the endless mental debate you have been having. There is also another layer to this moment that makes it especially fascinating. An ancient Sabian symbol is associated with the exact degree where this Cazimi occurs, and its image describes a man becoming aware of nature spirits and unseen energies. That symbolism is striking because Virgo is commonly associated with analysis, precision, logic, and careful observation, yet this particular degree introduces a very different dimension. It suggests that the deepest form of understanding does not necessarily end with intellectual analysis. At a certain point, clear thinking can lead you back toward intuition. You may understand something through your body before you can explain it through words. You may feel recognition in your gut, in your bones, or in that quiet internal space where certainty appears without a detailed argument attached to it. So if your clarity today arrives as a feeling of knowing rather than a perfectly organized chain of reasoning, do not assume that makes it less meaningful. The experience may be less about thinking harder and more about finally becoming receptive to what you already sense. And this leads into the second message, which carries a much stronger sense of urgency. The finger of God symbolism points toward action. If you have been carrying a dream, a purpose, a plan, or a vision for your future, especially something meaningful that you have repeatedly imagined but have not yet begun to build. This moment challenges you to stop remaining only in the visionary phase. Many people become comfortable there because imagining the future feels safer than constructing it. You can feel the calling, picture the person you could become, sense that your life has another direction available to it, and still keep waiting. You may tell yourself that you need more time, better circumstances, greater confidence, more preparation, or some unmistakable external confirmation before beginning. But the energy of this yod carries a different message. The sign you have been waiting for may be the moment itself. Pluto and Neptune are providing enormous collective forces, and the yod is directing those forces toward Virgo, where inspiration must become something practical. Virgo asks for the first task, the system that supports it, the practice that can be repeated, and the small action that proves the vision is no longer merely an idea. This is where the pressure becomes real. A dream that remains completely ungrounded can lose its form. If you do not give an idea structure, it can slowly dissolve, not because the idea lacked value, but because an idea without practical support has difficulty surviving a period as intense as eclipse season. The energy is moving too quickly for endless preparation to remain comfortable. So whatever has been quietly calling to you, whether it is a project, a career shift, creative work, a healing practice, or a conversation you have been avoiding, the invitation is not to complete everything at once. You do not need to build the entire staircase today. You only need to place the first step beneath your feet. Make one concrete move that brings the larger vision into physical reality because the next part of this awakening begins when what you have seen internally finally starts taking shape through what you are willing to do. The most important thing may be much simpler than you think, because the message here is not asking you to have everything figured out before you move. It is asking you to begin, and then allow movement itself to create the next piece of the path. But there is another layer to what you may have been experiencing, and it involves your body. Go back for a moment to that feeling you may have noticed recently: the unsettled stomach, the strange digestive reaction, the difficulty concentrating, or the sense that your thoughts have been surrounded by an invisible haze. There is a reason this matters in the context of the current alignment. In medical astrology, Virgo is associated with the digestive system, including the small intestine and the gut lining, as well as the intricate processes through which the body breaks down food and takes in nutrients. What makes this especially interesting is its connection to something modern science has increasingly recognized: the enteric nervous system. This is the enormous network of millions of neurons located throughout the digestive tract, and scientists often describe it as the second brain. That connection becomes even more meaningful when Mercury enters the picture, because Mercury is associated with the central nervous system and the vagus nerve, the major pathway that travels from the brainstem down toward the gut and creates communication between these two parts of the body. Now place that symbolism inside the intensity of eclipse season, while Mercury has been approaching combustion and moving progressively closer to the Sun, without yet reaching the condition of being in the heart of the Sun. The result can be understood as a period of heightened nervous activity. Your body may respond before your conscious mind even understands what is happening. Your stomach can tighten. Digestion can become irregular. You may experience bloating, acid reflux, or unexpected reactions to foods that normally cause no difficulty for you. At the same time, your thoughts can become harder to organize. Anxiety can rise without a clear external cause, and you may find yourself wondering whether the discomfort began with something physical or something emotional. The deeper truth is that the two experiences can become intertwined. The gut and brain communicate constantly, and when the nervous system is under pressure, the body can carry that pressure in ways that are difficult to separate from ordinary physical sensations. This is why the past stretch may have felt so strange for some people. You may have been trying to solve an emotional problem with your mind, while your body was simultaneously responding to the same tension. You may have tried to force yourself to think more clearly, while your nervous system was signaling that it needed less stimulation, not more. You may have pushed through fatigue, ignored the tightening in your stomach, continued consuming information late into the night, or remained surrounded by screens and noise while wondering why you could not settle internally. Within the symbolic framework of this alignment, the Cazimi marks a very different moment. At the exact meeting of the Sun and Mercury, the emphasis shifts toward illumination and reset. The mental loops that have kept you analyzing the same concern again and again may begin to lose their grip. And with that reduction in mental pressure, the physical tension associated with it may also begin to soften. The constant internal rehearsal, the repeated what-if questions, the anticipation of problems that have not happened, and the nervous energy that keeps you alert when you should be resting can begin to quiet. You may notice that your body wants to come down from the heightened state it has been occupying. Instead of remaining locked in fight or flight, you may feel a stronger pull toward the parasympathetic state, the state commonly described as rest and digest. This is why the significance of today does not have to remain purely intellectual. Within this astrological interpretation, it can also be viewed as a moment of physical recalibration. Your body may be asking for cooperation rather than resistance. If you are able to do so, make your surroundings and your routine simpler. Give your digestive system a lighter workload. Step away from constant information. Create periods of silence. Reduce the endless stream of screens, notifications, noise, and stimulation that keeps the nervous system receiving signals long after the day should have ended. You do not need to force a dramatic transformation. The invitation is to stop interfering with the body's natural attempt to settle. Sometimes the body has been carrying tension for so long that we mistake tension for normal. We become accustomed to clenched muscles, restless thoughts, shallow breathing, unsettled digestion, and the inability to fully relax. Then, when the pressure finally begins to release, the quiet can feel unfamiliar. If you had been operating primarily through adrenaline and anxiety for the last 2 weeks, consider this moment an opportunity to finally exhale. The body is constantly attempting to regulate itself, but that process becomes harder when we repeatedly override its signals. Listen when it asks for quiet. Notice when it asks for rest. Pay attention when your gut reacts before your mind has found the words to explain why. The larger message is not that every physical sensation must be interpreted astrologically, but that this particular alignment places extraordinary symbolic emphasis on the relationship between thought, perception, nervous activity, and the body's ability to settle. And there is one final piece that brings the entire story into a larger circle. Eclipses operate on a 19-year cycle, which means the eclipses occurring during this period are directly connected with eclipses that occurred in August of 2007. That means the experiences unfolding around you now may carry echoes from that earlier period. Think back to your life during August of 2007. Consider what was beginning, what was ending, what was breaking apart, what was being constructed, and what you could not understand at the time. The point is not necessarily that the exact same event must happen again. The deeper idea is that something from that period may be returning for completion. What could not be understood then may now be approached from a completely different level of maturity and perspective. You are not the same person you were 19 years ago. You have lived through experiences that change the way you interpret people, relationships, choices, disappointments, opportunities, and yourself. That difference matters. So if memories from that period have unexpectedly returned, if a person you have not thought about in years suddenly comes back into your awareness, or if an old situation begins occupying your thoughts again, pay attention to the emotional quality of that return. Even an unfamiliar feeling of déjà vu can become meaningful within this symbolism. Something may be resurfacing, not because you are meant to relive it, but because you are finally capable of seeing it from the perspective you did not have then. The same memory can carry an entirely different meaning when the person remembering it has changed. The same ending can look different when you understand why it happened. The same wound can become easier to release when you finally recognize the lesson hidden inside it. In that sense, the circle is not reopening so that you can walk backward. It is returning so that you can finish what remained incomplete. The Cazimi becomes especially significant within that process because its symbolism of heightened Mercury clarity provides the mental sharpness needed to recognize what the past is showing you. You may finally understand a pattern that once seemed impossible to explain. You may recognize why a certain chapter had to end. You may see the role a particular person or experience played without needing to carry the emotional weight of it any longer. Completion does not always arrive through an external event. Sometimes it arrives through an internal shift, the moment you can remember something without becoming trapped inside it. That is the difference between repeating a cycle and completing one. You are not necessarily being pulled backward. You may simply be reaching the point where an old circle can finally close. And when that closure happens, the change may not remain confined to your thoughts. You may notice it in the way you hold yourself, the way your body feels, the way you respond to situations, and the way you move through ordinary life. The person who entered this eclipse season may carry assumptions, fears, habits, and emotional patterns that the person emerging from it no longer needs in the same way. That is the deeper transformation being described here. The purpose is not to become someone completely unrelated to who you were. It is to become someone who no longer needs to carry what has already completed its purpose. If this message has stayed with you until this point, I truly appreciate the time and attention you have given to it. If the interpretation resonated with something you have personally been experiencing, consider subscribing so you can continue exploring this kind of spiritual and astrological content. And share what has been surfacing for you in the comments. What emotions have appeared, what memories have returned, and what seems to be changing internally. Your experience may reveal a pattern that someone else is also quietly living through. For today, be especially attentive to yourself. Treat your body with patience. Give your mind room to become quiet, and listen carefully to the clarity that begins to emerge. What you recognize now may become the bridge into the next stage of this transformation.